Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Juan Jose Gonzalez, and I will get us started shortly. So what I am doing right now is I am putting in the chat box a link to this slide deck for you all. The reason why I do that is because embedded in the slide deck, you will see some hyperlinks and some links to resources and things of that nature. And I just wanted to give you guys access to those. I know that this slide deck will be uploaded to the NOFO website in the long run, but just even if you wanted to get started with some of the information that I'm presenting, I will show you how the hyperlinks work and how they you can click through some of the pages, but I just wanted to put that for everyone right there. So I'm putting the slide deck in viewing form for all of you in the chat box. So this is the agenda I plan for you today. We already have had the welcome from the CEO, and I'm gonna kind of introduce a little bit about my background at Education System Center. And then we're going to talk about some of the useful pathways progression frameworks. It looks like many of you are kind of looking at this notice of funding opportunity from a nonprofit foundation list. I did see someone from a school district as well. So I'm going to be using kind of some of those resources tailored to that audience about how you create pathways, how you align your programs into the kind of the pathways framework, so that what you're doing is not just doing job training, but you're doing pathways development, right? We're going to talk a little bit about how to pathway creation, how to align your pathway to the labor market information, and how to align kind of competencies and skill progression along the pathway as well. Jeffrey, I think I see you kind of speaking. If you can mute yourself, I'd be really appreciated. Thank you. Great. Some quick notes. So I will be able to kind of look at questions and answer questions in the chat box. So I definitely want to encourage all of you to kind of put stuff in the chat box and kind of put stuff in there.
It's supposed to be about an hour, but
Thank you. And this is being recorded, and I put the kind of the slide deck in the chat box, and I will kind of be able to answer questions as I see them pop up. So a little bit about myself. See, once again, I'm Juan Jose Gonzalez. I work for an organization called Education System Center. So Education System Center is affiliated with Northern Illinois University, and our mission that you see here on the screen is to shape and strengthen the educational workforce system to advance racial equity and also prepare young people for productive careers in our economy. We do this in three main buckets, right? So we do a lot of work on college and career pathways. That means partnering with high school districts, community colleges, but also workforce systems to kind of create college and career pathway systems. We do a lot of work in the space called bridges to post-secondary, and that means kind of programs or efforts around dual credit, early college credit, community college credit, but also transition into kind of formalized post-secondary education institutions. So from workforce into community colleges and things of that nature, for example. And then we also help the state with a lot of data impact and leadership. So the state's longitudinal data systems around kind of workforce, labor market information, and college and career metrics. We do our work statewide, so we partner with a lot of kind of state agencies such as DCEO, the Community College Board, the State Board of Education. But we also do a lot of our work at the kind of local regional level. So we will partner with certain regionals kind of entities such as, for example, the Greater Peoria Economic Development Organization, Chicago Public Schools and City Colleges of Chicago, right? Or maybe Vandalia One, which is like a kind of workforce development kind of initiative in the Vandalia region in Southern Illinois. So we do a lot of our work statewide, community networks. The work I'm going to be presenting to you today is a lot of our work that has been kind of through statewide frameworks, and that'll hopefully help you with pathways creation. Okay, so what you see here on your screen is the official career pathways definition as kind of created and set up by the department, by DCEO and IDES, and it's on the webpage of the NOFO. If you click here on the hyperlink, you'll see that it come up to the kind of the attachment and kind of career pathways definition. As you can see here, it's multiple pages, multiple line items, lots of complicated stuff. And I find I encourage you all to kind of click on this link and read that, but I'm going to just kind of give you some helpful frameworks that I think are a little more visual and a little more digestible as you create your kind of program or apply to the NOFO and as you align to career pathways definitions, right? So the first pathways framework that I want to put on your screen is this one that we've been showing at Education System Center a lot with kind of entities, right? So the state career pathways framework is aligning around this general framework that on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see that a good career pathway has 4 key components, right, that I think are most helpful. Number one, there has to be individualized planning, meaning that the person who is a part of the pathway, either be a young person, a young adult, or an adult, has to have a sense of active choices that they are making in order to be a part of the pathway, right? They're not just being told to just do this or do that. They are making active choices and planning for themselves. There's in any pathway, there's always going to be a good amount of career focused instruction or like skill acquisition, right? Career focus. So very unique to a pathway, unique to a certain industry sector, unique to a certain job sector, or career area. And that could be in the form of coursework on the job. It's primarily in the notion of coursework and things of that nature. The next thing I kind of wanted to highlight is work-based learning. A good pathway should and always will have a very robust amount of work-based learning, hands-on work-based learning opportunities, right? So like on-the-job training, internships, project-based learning, career exploration, and things of that nature. So we can never forget work-based learning as a kind of an important element of a pathway. And last but not least, core academics. What we mean by core academics is most pathways, in order to get yourself to the higher earning jobs and occupations, you're going to need to go through some formalized post-secondary institutions. So there's some core academic requirements you're going to need to fulfill. So whether that be kind of like being able to manage English 101, English composition, or certain math skill sets at the community college level or at trade school and things of that nature, we always need to pay attention to make sure that does someone have a good foundation of English, math, science, or social science? And does that, if those are core academics, complement their career focused skill sets and instruction? And as you see here, there's like a linear, in theory, there should be a linear progression from like a secondary institution to and through a post-secondary institution where someone earns credentials, earns degrees, and therefore gets access to more skilled jobs and more higher earning jobs and kind of higher labor market outcomes, right? Now, this is all a very linear pathway progression, but in reality, we see that that linear design doesn't always work out, right? The pathway progression is actually more a series of chutes and ladders, right? People go up, they fall down, they encounter bureaucratic challenges, they encounter challenges with their nonprofits they partner, community colleges they encounter, workforce systems. So it's like this constant like step forward, step back situation that's not very linear, right? So in reality, there's a lot of different ways that someone could advance in a pathway or in their career, right? And these are some of the categories that I'm going to be talking about throughout today's session that I really want to cement with you all as you design your pathway and apply to the NOFO, right? So pathway progression strategies are like coherent strategies that kind of incorporate the idea of sequencing, right? The idea that someone should be able to advance steadily or rapidly into a pathway, and that those systems or those progressions have articulation to formalize post-secondary programs, processes, and institutions as well, right? And the student should, and the young person or the individual should be able to enter and exit into a pathway, either to start working, go back into the pathway to advance themselves academically or skill-wise in order to keep earning credentials and kind of advancing economically, right? So bridge programs, as many of you know, by definition, there's something called a bridge program. Bridge programs are situations where folks with like limited English acquisition or limited English skills are going to a kind of like a college or or a local nonprofit to get English skills and then transition into formalized training, right? So they go to learn English, or maybe they go to get their GED, and then they progress into like more formalized programs for credit articulation. Now, NARC credit articulation is a pathway progression strategy where someone can come with prior work experience, or maybe through they get like a skill set development through like a local nonprofit, and some of those skills or some of those competencies that they get articulate and get credit at the community college or trade school level, right? So sometimes many colleges or trade schools give credit for prior experience or prior training in other avenues. And that is a very valuable skill to kind of progress in your pathway. Guided transfer, there's some kind of jobs and industry sectors where inevitably you're going to need to keep progressing beyond just like a low industry credential or low certificate. You're going to need to progress to a associate's degree or potentially even over time to a bachelor's degree. And a guided transfer is do you develop a pathway where you're counseling a person or an individual, an adult, to take certain community college courses so they can keep advancing, right? Here on the right-hand side, we have this notion that it's systems of acceleration strategies, right? Ways that someone could advance more quickly in their pathway and their skill set. And that involves prior learning, competency-based education, and there's also for those of you working with high school students, there's this notion of a college and career pathway that someone can earn as a high school graduate. It's a college career pathway endorsement that indicates that a young person has a robust pathway experience and some competency in an industry sector. So this kind of screen, what you see here on your screen, is going to walk you through a more realistic pathway system framework. And that's going to encompass a lot of the adults and young people that you guys may be encountering and supporting, and how you can really kind of help them progress in a pathway, right? So the first and foremost is there's pathways that start with high school, right? So young people, early as freshman or sophomore year, they graduate high school with some already existing pathway experiences, right? So they might even, while in high school, earn a college and career pathway endorsement. They might earn a short-term credential from the local community college. They might learn a basic certificate, or they might earn like an industry credential, right? So sometimes some high schools create pathways around like manufacturing credentials, certified nursing assistant, so on and so forth, right? That high school student should be aiming high and should be earning these credentials in purple, but then quickly progressing into and advancing at a post-secondary level, whether that be trade school, community college, or even eventually a bachelor's degree, right? Now, for bridge programs, we have a lot of adults that we encounter that sometimes need to get their GED, get some English language skills. Those folks many times are kind of earning the equivalent of a high school diploma or a short-term credential, but then they should be encouraged to progress and not just stop with that low-level credential, but they should be encouraged to progress to advance to certificates and other kind of community college programs as well, if possible. This is not uncommon. Many community colleges have bridge programs, and they should be partnering with local workforce development agencies or local nonprofits to take their participants and progress them into the local college. Similarly with Opportunity Youth and now GEDs, this blue line here is a similarly people getting their GED, getting their high school diploma, and then quickly progressing through the pathway structures at post-secondary level. Now, there's also kind of community college credential pathways, right? We know that folks can earn at community colleges their basic certificates, advanced certificates, and associate's degrees, and those kind of may even set them up for robust success with job placement, right? They may be able to get some high earning jobs with those, and that might be where they need to go. But there's also an opportunity. Many times there's some called like career and technical degrees at community colleges called Associates of Applied Science. And some of those now even have like transferability to bachelor's degree programs like in manufacturing, right? You can earn an associate's degree or a certificate in manufacturing where you can start working as a machinist or like an industrial technician. And then if you wanted to become a supervisor, Northern Illinois University, for example, has like an online program where you can articulate some of your prior coursework and degrees and get trained up to like supervising in the manufacturing space. So there's even kind of advancement from community college degrees and backgrounds. And then last but not least, the guided transfers with this much more traditional bachelor's degree route. People go to community college, get an associate's degree, and then transfer to a bachelor's degree to get maybe like a degree in computer science or information technology or like cybersecurity and things of that nature, right? So those are more, this is actually more accurate about how people enter pathway structures and how they could advance. And then all the while they are kind of potentially also entering or exiting and earning, getting into occupations with various levels of skill requirements and various level of job earning potential. Lastly, there's one thing I did want to highlight, that there's sometimes an opportunity for people to earn college credit for their prior work experience. And I've mentioned this before, and that should be able to kind of factor into a pathway strategy as well. So sometimes you might have like career changes, right? Someone who used to work in, I don't know, maybe a teacher, for example, right? Now they want to pivot to a job in information technology. They have some background, some coursework, some in-office experience or adult experience that should travel and articulate for them. And you should always be seeking an opportunity with your local college, trade school, or workforce development system to see how those skill sets transfer. For those of you in the high school space, this is the college and career pathway endorsement. It's by definition a robust pathway experience young high school students could earn. You'll see here that the requirements for a student to earn the pathway endorsement kind of follow the best practices of what a pathway should have, right? Individual student planning, professional learning, which is work-based learning in this blue section. The red box here is the career focused instructional sequence. So that normally means career and technical education or other courses that they can earn. And then academic readiness, making sure that they pay attention to English and math skills in order to advance, right? So for those of you in the high school space, I encourage you to kind of take this slide deck, click on this framework here in this page and kind of learn more about that opportunity at our webpage, where we have a much more deep dive on resources for high school students to earn a college and career pathway endorsement. Now, for those of you right now kind of who are applying for the NOFO and thinking about aligning your job occupations, your job training programs, or your systems to pathway creation, the first step in this process that I always really encourage folks is to align kind of your programs to accurate and very thoughtful and deliberate labor market information. Many of you have this experience, but we're going to show some resources of how us at Ed Systems, in combination with the Community College Board and DCO, have been doing this in a lot of statewide programs, right? So first is, as you think about like what jobs or what occupations or industries you want people to access, you got to kind of think about 3 important criteria. First, for any job that you want to place someone into, you got to look up like what is the minimum typical entry level of education that is needed for that role, for that occupation, or for that industry, right? Some industries require bachelor's degree, some require an associate's degree or just an advanced certificate. But in reality, long gone are the days that where most jobs you can access to just a high school diploma, right? So you really got to be looking at kind of how you can access these things, what are kind of the minimum level of occupation that is needed for most jobs. And the Department of Labor provides that information, and I'll show you how to access that. Wages. No, for any occupation, you really got to think about like, what are the wages, the median wages that someone could be earning with that job and that role. And here's the thing. When we at Ed Systems, when we look at wages, we don't really just care about is that wage over minimum wage. We actually think that's a bad threshold. You really got to thinking about like, do the wages for that occupation or for that pathway or for that industry sector kind of provide wages that are above a living wage, and now kind of provide access to resources to think about that as well. And then you always got to be looking about job openings, right? Will this job or this occupation or this pathway sector have increased openings in the future in order so that it makes worthwhile to encourage people to enter that sector? And then any job or occupation or industry sector that is does well among all 3 sectors, we like to think about it like a high priority occupation, high priority pathway. So as you think about your job placements or your programs, are you hitting the nice sweet spot of all 3 sectors of it and making yourself high priority? Now, the living wage, kind of how do you determine if the occupation you're benchmarking to is living wage, right? So living wage is the minimum salary you would need in order to cost of living expenses, pay all your bills in your community or in your state. That doesn't mean put away towards savings, pay down debt or anything like that. It's just kind of what is the bare minimum you need to just be able to live and pay all your bills. Living wage will adjust based on whether you live by yourself, you're married or a spouse and have a child, or maybe you have a family with multiple children or things of that nature, right? So your living wage will adjust based on the size of your family. A very, very helpful calculator that we really encourage people to look at is MIT's living wage calculator, which updates itself annually and has a lot of those calculations baked in and easy to access. This is the living wage calculator page. You could type in your county in Illinois or things of that nature. So I'm going to just go to the Illinois page for the living wage calculator, and you can choose the living wage for most of your counties here on this page, right? And they also have for metropolitan statistical areas throughout the state. I'm going to look at the results for the state as a whole for Illinois, and you'll see here what is the living wage. If you were one adult with no children, you need to be earning $15 an hour, right? But if you were 2 adults with 1 child, you would need to be earning $28 an hour in order to kind of meet your living wage threshold. You see here this chart that's pretty helpful for you to look at. And then they also have the calculation for poverty wages, right? So if you have a job that's, maybe placing someone at like a median salary of like $11 or $12 an hour, well, that goes to like a poverty wage, and you should really think about, is that job training program worth it, right? Now, how do you find out this information? Now that you have the living wage, how do you find out if, certain jobs are placing, or what are like the earning potential or the minimum education requirements for various occupations, right? So a lot of that information is provided by the Department of Labor. They take surveys of workplaces, surveys of individuals in certain kind of professions, and then they kind of compile that data and project or kind of sample and kind of give accurate projections of what it takes to have certain occupations, right? My favorite page to look at this information in a very simple way is this career one-stop page here on your link, right? So I'll show you. And then you can type in an occupation here. So like registered nurse, for example, and then you can type in for your city or for your county, or maybe in some cases you for your state, and you'll start getting some information based on that as well. I already did some of this work around registered nurses, and I just want to highlight for you how you should be looking at that page of information, right? First thing you should look at, and when you look up registered nurses on that web page I linked, you'll see here a chart of their hourly, like the hourly wages, or at the low end of the scale and at the high end of the scale, right? And now I'm going to be looking at which of these wages hits the living wage criteria for one adult, one child, right? So one adult living by themselves with one dependent, right? Now that living wage benchmark is somewhere in between $28 and $34 an hour, and the median wage of registered nurses is $34, nearly $35. So if I was a registered nurse, at my median, I would be definitely kind of above the living wage threshold and be able to sustain one dependent in my family, right? So those are some of the ways that you should think about, like, okay, for various occupations, what is the scale of that occupation over time, right? When you should assume is the 10% scale, the one here on the bottom, is for probably entry-level people, right? At the 10%, those is probably what a registered nurse is earning at the entry level. And at the high end is like a veteran or kind of like a very experienced nurse. You'll see here on the right-hand side, the education level. You'll see that a lot of nurses registered nurses have master's degrees. Some of them have bachelor's degrees. Most of them have bachelor's degrees. Some of them have associate's degrees and things of that nature. I want to point your attention to the bottom of the screen here, though, whereas on that same page where I was looking at, there's a line that says the education experience to get started says bachelor's degree. But then you'll see that some of these folks are working as registered nurses with an associate's degree or less. My theory as to what's happening is there's some people who are working as registered nurses who started off when the requirements for registered nurses were lower, so such as like an associate's degree or less, right? But increasingly now, most registered nurses are probably starting with a bachelor's degree. So the people working with less than a bachelor's degree were grandfathered in, and new entrants will probably need a bachelor's degree, or maybe some of them, a very trickle amount, are getting in with an associate's degree. So that's something to look at as well, right? Don't just look at this chart of the breakdown of the education level of people. Look at what it takes to get started and kind of compare and contrast. This will be important in manufacturing and IT because a lot of those roles have mixed messages about what it takes to get started. And then, of course, for registered nurses, you'll see the projected employment over time. There's a chart there that shows, right? So the United States projected employment, but the statewide projected employment, you'll see the 12% change over time and the annual job openings, right? One thing I want to note is that if you were to kind of calculate 12% increase from 133 to 150,000, that's not 9,000 openings. What is actually happening is these are the annual openings, right? So annual openings mean people either leave the profession or leave or retire, but also sometimes people just keep the job and just change to a new location, right? So maybe I work at one hospital system and then I change to work at a different one. That is not a change in growth of the profession. That's just annual, like the churn and burn of people, employees in that profession, right? The actual increase is this percent change right here. Now, for those of you kind of thinking about like, man, do I really have to do this deep dive labor market analysis for my kind of job program or something? You don't have to, because we've maybe done some of this, and there's some avenues that this has already happened that you can look at for yourself, right? So as a part of a project for the Illinois Community College Board, my organization, Education System Center, did an analysis of the labor market for 8 industry sectors in the state throughout the state and kind of link those industry sectors to like community college training programs and providers, right? So we did them in the areas of education. So if you're thinking about a program in early childhood and health sciences, so that includes programs like certified nursing, medical assistants, farm technicians, and radiologic technicians, information technology, so like cybersecurity, networking, manufacturing, trades. So that's over here in architecture, construction, and energy, finance and business, so like accounting, and of course, like agriculture, food, and natural. So we've done 8 deep dive labor market analyses in 8 sectors. And this link right here will take you to a page where you can kind of download those labor market analyses and kind of read through them as well. And I'll kind of show you some highlights from those sections as I go. There's a question around, is there separate analyses of how these apply to people with disabilities? I would say that there is not unique and different analyses for people with disabilities. Labor market analysis is like pretty much universal. The programs and supports that someone with disabilities would need, I think that's where they kind of stand out and need unique accommodations. But I don't know if the labor market is unique to kind of any sub-demographic group. Now, in those kind of, what are those, the things I just showed you, they're called model programs of study. In those model programs of study, we define things like something called a high priority occupation and or a promising credential, right? And then we used kind of the MIT living wage calculator, and we set a benchmark for ourselves is like, we want to encourage people to get occupations where they could sustain themselves for 1 adult and 1 child. And then we defined a promising credential as any degree, industry credential, college certificate that place someone either in a high priority occupation or in a career or in a pathway that led to a high priority occupation. So something that was stackable also counted, right? This is an example of how we did this for finance and business, right? We looked at various occupations in the finance and business sector. We looked at the median hourly wage. Is that a living wage? Does that have job growth? And what is the entry education level, annual openings, and the percentage growth, right? And then we kind of made like a green dot or a green light for those occupations that we thought like, hey, we should really be benchmarking our programs, our pathways to these occupations. These yellow lights, maybe we should be benchmarking to these, and I'll kind of give an example of what the yellow means. And then those that are blank, we definitely thought like, hey, let's not create programs or programs of study linked to those because they were not meeting the benchmarks that we set for ourselves. And then kind of we looked at how those kind of degrees at the various community colleges or kind of certificates lead to the various occupations and how they are kind of linked or kind of correlate from themselves, right? Now, there's another project that I want to showcase to you all that I think would be very helpful. And this is much more for those of you with job training programs that are not sending folks to community colleges, right? As if you have adult learners or adult kind of job changes, right? We have this notion of a middle skills pathway, right? A middle skills pathway is for someone with higher than a high school diploma, but less than a bachelor's degree. This page has a hyperlink here as well, where you can kind of go to our webpage and you can look a lot of our research and analysis. We have a separate webinar, glossary, and a set of frameworks that you guys can look at. But essentially in this space, we created this notion of a green light occupation, right? A high priority occupation, in demand and living wage. We talked about like a gateway occupation, maybe a job that is not immediately kind of high enough wage based on the living wage calculator, but was an important entry into an industry sector that we thought it was very worthwhile for someone to still kind of enter that profession. So an example of this was like certified nursing assistant, right? There's always a demand for certified nursing assistants, but they don't earn much. But we felt that a certified nursing assistant or starting as a nursing assistant was worthwhile because it introduced you to the career trajectory of a nurse. And it's something you should definitely be exploring and kind of confirming for yourself if someone wants to continue on that pathway. And it was a very like common occurrence for those in like a bridge program to explore nursing as well, right? And last but not least, another helpful framework for those of you kind of in the adult learners or space is there's something called the Illinois Demand Occupation Training Provider List, right? So the demand occupation training providers are a part of the WIOA, the Workforce Next system, right? And in that, there are certain occupations that were going to be allowed for use of WIOA funds that always were kind of, if they met certain criteria, they're always going to be allowed as training programs, right? And these are those occupations that at a minimum for education level, you can use WIOA funds for jobs that had an education level higher than a high school diploma and moderate on the job training, right? But less than a bachelor's degree. The wages that we benchmarked, that the DC kind of the WIOA system benchmarked, were wages that had were meeting 85% of the living wage threshold for one adult, one child, and had job openings that were increasing, right? And those were high priority occupations. All right, so that was a big deep dive as you create your programs, kind of benchmarking towards labor market information. Now, the other things you guys should be doing is benchmarking towards certain competencies, certain skill sets, and certain skill progressions in your pathways development systems, right? All of us know how to do job training or entry-level job placement, but you should be paying attention to how those job placements lead to further advancement. So if you're really doing this correctly, kind of in the state policy framework, it is Ed Systems determining that if you're really preparing someone well for kind of pathways, they're going to have a certain minimum set of foundational skills for all careers, not just one career. They're going to have a certain professionalism, essential employability skills, foundational for various careers. And that's a proper creation of a pathway, right? Now, in a pathways framework, that person is also going to be accelerated in a particular industry area, right? So that they have multiple experiences, multiple years of coursework, or multiple months of training in a certain industry sector. And then there's an even emphasis on how to getting them ready, or even some experience at high school and college of certain college coursework in a certain industry sector. And this goes beyond just like CTE programs, right? And last but not least, if you're creating a pathway correctly, inevitably you're getting that person ready for eventual entry into the post-secondary community college or university system, right? And the reason for that is most higher earning occupations now increasingly require a minimum of an advanced certificate, an associate's degree, forget a bachelor's degree, but the associate's degree and advanced certificate, typical through a community college system, is required for most higher earning jobs that meet like a living wage benchmark. So your pathway, your job training program, yes, can help someone get a job right away, but inevitably you gotta get them ready to handle the rigor of post-secondary institutions and post-secondary training. The state has defined 7 broad pathway areas, and many of your job training programs will likely fit within 7 industry sectors. So for example, human and public services also includes like education, criminal justice, right? Health science is going to be very broad. That's going to include like medical assistants, farm technicians, things of that nature. So these are kind of, there's subcategories within these. Now, something very helpful that I think for all of you kind of creating programs that get people into like entry-level jobs is we have a set of like technical and employability competencies that I think you should benchmark your job training programs to, right? So the Post-Secondary Workforce Readiness Act that passed in 2016 helped kind of stimulated the creation of these competencies. And these are just on your right-hand side, you'll see a set of competencies of general employability skills, right? What are the general job skills, essential workplace skills that someone should have? And you can see these skill sets and deep dive on the PDF linked in the slide deck, right? So when this comes up, you'll see that this has multiple pages, an explainer what these competencies are, how they were formed. We use a lot of we benchmark these competencies to what a lot of employers were telling us, who a lot of their HR representatives, a lot of the industry experts in job placement programs helped us create these competencies in general. But then they also help to create competencies for certain jobs and certain industry sectors, right? And these are the competencies that someone should display after they complete either a high school pathway or like a job training program, and means they're ready for entry-level employment in that industry sector. So we did some for manufacturing, engineering, and technology. We also did some for health sciences. All of the competencies that we did for the various sectors are going to be in this PDF, and we highly encourage you to look at these for information technology and things of that nature. Because if you're creating job training programs into a certain industry sector, that person should have competence. It means they should display these basic skill sets, and they will be kind of highly marketable and highly capable to enter into entry-level occupation and then even progress in their pathway. One thing I wanted to highlight once again is these model programs of study guides that we created for the Illinois Community College Board. The reason why I wanted to highlight these is they look at what are some of the very, very entry-level courses that someone in a kind of certain pathway space or an industry sector can be targeting as their like introductory strategic community college courses, right? We're not talking about like advanced courses for like a major or someone in a bachelor's degree. We're talking about entry-level courses that someone should be targeting either from a bridge program, from a job training program, or from a high school space that will really introduce them to the right courses to get them advanced and progressing in their pathway, right? So for example, in health science, right? If you want to keep advancing in a health science program or training, you're inevitably going to have to go through courses such as like medical terminology or anatomy and physiology. So those model programs of study guides identify those strategic courses through like a kind of process, and we talk about where and how you should be taking those courses, right? And I'll show you an example. This is the model program of study guide in health sciences. As you see here, it has on the bottom right, the labor market information that I talked about earlier, some of the community college credentials and degrees that you can be getting on the top right-hand side of your screen. But I wanted to deep dive. This is the labor market information that's shown in those guides. This is kind of the various community college credentials, degrees, certificates that you can be earning. And here what it shows is some of the courses that you should be targeting. Now, this is made for an audience of high school students and high school administrators, but I would say that these courses that you should be targeting are also applicable for kind of an adult person trying to enter into that space, right? They should be targeting and entering into with medical terminology, anatomy and physiology, and they should be earning some kind of, they should be taking a course that guarantees them like industry credential and entry into that industry sector. Dana, on the previous slide, these are just the pathway progression strategies. You have this PDF linked through kind of the slide deck. I encourage you to kind of download the larger image of this slide deck, and then I'll let you kind of look at that as well. But you'll see here, these are the typical programs that you can get at the various community colleges throughout the state. I wanted to show you guys also kind of what this work was done for manufacturing and engineering, right? The state has a huge emphasis kind of on manufacturing and programs and things of that nature. So on the bottom right, once again, you see the labor market information. On the top right, you see kind of the various industry credentials, certificates you can be earning. And then there's a deep dive on the courses, the basic skill sets that you should be earning. Now, what I like about the manufacturing and engineering program of study, and we do this also in agriculture, information technology, which is we also kind of talk about certain skills, competencies that you should be taking or earning either in community college courses, high school courses, or in the case of many of you in your job training program, right? What competencies in a specific, should someone be graduating or completing? And we list those in that larger model program of study guide. And we even suggest what like industry credentials that person should be earning. So we say if someone who's in an advanced training program around manufacturing, on the bottom right here in your screen, that person should be earning like a NIMS credential or MSSC credentials. And we talk about kind of where in the process they should be earning those credentials as well. So for those of you thinking about like IT or manufacturing, I really encourage you to look at those programs and study guides, because we even deep dive into some industry credentials that are worthwhile for people to earn. And also sometimes in health science as well. Now with that, kind of those are the big buckets of information that I wanted to kind of show you guys around pathway creation, right? Think about this, right? Always thinking about like, am I aligning my job training program to a larger pathway with higher earning living wage potential? And am I choosing the competencies, the skill sets in general employability, but in certain technical competencies as well, that I'm helping someone be ready for entry-level employment? For that, I'll pause and see if there's any questions. I don't know if folks want to raise their hand or just put them in the chat box, but I'll look to see if there's any questions at the moment. Great. If there's no questions, I really thank you all for joining me. Martha, if you can elaborate, I'd be welcome to kind of hear what you're thinking.
Yeah, I really do feel like you're at this level and our job trainings are at this level. And I was hoping this opportunity would get us somewhere closer to this level. And I just feel like you've given, some very high expectations of the job training programs. And I think we do a great job, actually, but I don't think there's recognition of what we're doing here in the field. It feels like we're all getting pushed into this academic area. And guess what? There are people that just want to go to work and earn a wage and get out of not being unemployed or underemployed.
I understand.
So I guess I'm a little frustrated. Particularly, you don't have an answer for persons with disabilities. And all of the sectors that you picked out are ones that you say they're accommodated in, but I can tell you many examples where they're not.
Dana,
So
I understand your frustration.
I mean, it's very frustrating. I wish the state would listen to
if
us.
I may, Dana, I understand your frustration. I know some people sometimes want to get a job and get back into the workforce, right? But we don't want to set up people for dead end jobs because that doesn't help anybody. So like, we really need to focus on
It's
bridging
not a
that.
dead end job. It's not a dead end job. For some
some
people,
jobs
this is their first job.
I
And they're
understand that.
actually looking for a way to get into the workplace because no one has hired them.
I understand that, but it is our responsibility as program providers, training providers, to figure out how we can get them a job with stackability and opportunities for further employment. All right, and that's all
I
that these
guess
pathways of
I
progression
just
are
feel
doing.
like we're talking different language, but that's okay. I'll take the information you gave. I appreciate the information you gave. I guess I'm hoping that, for example, there's more information on transitional jobs, on entry-level jobs, so that people can at least get their feet wet and build their confidence and actually work their way into these other jobs. I'm not going to get people in my job training program that are looking at registered nursing. It's just not going to happen right now.
All right, but it might be worthwhile to get someone into like a practical nurse program, right? That is a lot less than registered nursing, and that could start with a certified nursing assistant. Right.
Well,
But if you're providing the supports for someone to get that certified nursing assistant role, and then you keep your supports over time so that
well, and I think you don't even recognize the fact that some of those that come out of high school don't yet even have the skill areas that the high school should have been giving them. So we're still trying to match, what they got out of their high school experience with now that secondary experience. So, I'll just say what I say and I'll be done. Thanks.
I agree with Martha, and I think that maybe if there's a possibility of aligning people with technical skills training and on-the-job training, people want to get to work right away. We're looking at short-term courses for people, maybe 8-week workshops or leading to an entry-level job where they continue with on-the-job training. Now, is this program designed to encourage people to go? Does this need to be in our proposal, the whole college aspect of it? Because a lot of people don't have time for that right now. They want the job right now.
Hi, this is Dana, and I just wanted to say a little bit about, talk about what you all are talking about. So hopefully you can hear me well. We work with people with disabilities because they're human beings first, and they're just someone with a disability. But what we do is, if we know that when they come in and they let us know that they have a disability, I work with the employer as well as them, because we've had people that come in, we start them with CNA, we give them the extra resource and assistance to help them, because you have to start at a certain level. If we know that they are struggling a little bit or struggling more than we anticipated, then we also we find a good work experience somewhere in that area so they can just get an idea of how that works. We don't just let it stop because, excuse me, just because they have a disability, because they're a human being and they need to take care of themselves as well. So we do go through the entire, we prepare what we call an IEP, and most of us do, individual employment plan, and we start from where they are. So I'm not sure who the lady was earlier. Don't get discouraged of what he's saying. That's just the pathway. But the pathway can start at just the work experience. And so they can get to know that part of the program or know that part of what they're looking into. This summer, I placed 2 young men, both had disabilities, and we're working with them right now. They end up getting a credential, believe it or not, in OSHA. And they try, and they try very hard. So I try very hard with them. So don't let the PowerPoint itself discourage you, but it's other ways like the work experience, and then getting them into a program that's not gonna not too hard, but to give them the time and the resources and everything they need to go through that. I had a young lady, the same thing. We did the same thing. She wanted to work in manufacturing, so we put her in manufacturing doing, the first thing she did was actually taking temperatures for the manufacturing company. And she was just taking temperatures as they come in to see if anybody was having issues with the coronavirus. So don't let that discourage you. It's ways that IEP is, as the state say, a living document. And we work it just like a living document. So you have to put it in your steps. What he's saying is very good because we do that also. But when you have someone that needs a little bit more help, you have to put their steps in. And if you want to call me, you can always call me or email me at dwashington@kcc.edu.
Okay, great. So we've had a great discussion. Juan, did you have anything else to add?
No, I was just responding to some folks in the chat, and I think we kind of we addressed their concern about culinary or kind of food service programs. That would just be a question for DCO directly.
Yes, and I will be saving the chat and sending this chat onto the personnel working on the JTED NOFO for DCO. And so they can get back to you. They will probably get back to you via the FAQ. So they'll be posting an FAQ on the JTED website where they answer and address all the questions again. So even if your question has been answered during this session by Juan, they will go ahead and re-answer it on the FAQ. So that way you can check back if you need to address that in future reference. The contact information for that DCO personnel, I believe they are directing you to just submit questions to the live FAQ on the JTED website, which is, I just put the website in the chat for everyone. So you can actually go to the frequently asked questions and then you're available to submit a question there and they can address it there as well. And you'll get notified when they respond back. Any other questions or closing remarks today? Oh, all right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your time this morning. Thank you, Juan, for the presentation. I know everyone appreciated you taking the time to answer all their questions and allow for that discussion. And I just wanted to reiterate that you can find this session recorded in the session slide deck today up on the JTED website, which I went ahead and put in the chat for everyone. And go ahead and ask your questions there via the FAQ as well. And I think that's all we have today. Any final remarks, Juan?
That's it for me. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your Monday.